We hear in today's reading, our first reading, and then of course in the gospel as well, we hear a lot on the theme of death. First of all, in our first reading, we have these 7 brothers who are all put to death in front of their mother. And it's a very powerful witness to the power of faith and the effect that faith should have on us even in those moments of suffering and trial. And then we have in our gospel, we have the Pharisees asking questions about death and heaven and what it will be like with the resurrection. And of course, the Pharisees, as always, they get everything wrong, it seems. And today is no exception. You know, here we are, we're talking about death, we're talking about heaven and resurrection, and they're worried about who the wife of 7 brothers would be married to when they get there. You know, that sums the Pharisees up. Today's gospel really kind of sums them up all in kind of one little brief story there. But anyway, we have this theme of death and resurrection and heaven and what that means for us and lots of questions. Incidentally then as well, November is the month in our church throughout the world where we're asked in a special way to focus on prayers for our loved ones who have passed or friends. You know, anyone who we know, love, and care for on earth. We are to remember them in a special way during this month of November. We begin November by remembering all of the saints on November 1st. And then on November 2nd, the next day, we have our All Souls Day. And we had our Mass this year again in the cemetery here in town, which was very beautiful. But we remember then throughout the month, and it started, I believe, as kind of because of the fact that, at least in the Northern Hemisphere, lots of things in nature, when we look around the natural world throughout the month of November, we're confronted with death. Whether it's leaves or other, you know, we see the birds flying south and getting out of town, and it gets obviously colder and so on and so forth. And it's a month that, just because of what's going on in nature, it seems more suitable to think about and meditate on those who we have lost in our own life as well. And so wanted to offer just a couple of reflections or a couple of things to think about with regards to death in this month of November and in relationship as well to some of the questions that maybe come out of today's gospel and first reading. One of the things that we're doing here at our parish, the first thing I would like to say is it's a custom in a lot of Catholic churches to have throughout the month of November a kind of a shrine, if you will, or a place to kind of maybe bring a picture of a loved one who has passed, maybe to bring in some flowers to that place, to have some candles that can be lit. We're trying to kind of put that together and kind of it's an organic thing. We'll just kind of see how it develops, but we've begun that in the back of our church, back by our candle stand. We figured we've been praying for Pope Francis long enough. He's good now. No, we obviously will continue to pray for Pope Francis, but we took that down. There's some prayers by the candle stand in the back for deceased loved ones and family and friends, and also a picture of the empty tomb that's there. And then also a place if you would like to bring in a picture of a loved one who's passed. If we run out of room, we'll bring in another table and we'll set more up. If you would like to bring in some flowers or something like that along those lines as well, please feel free to do that. It's a very beautiful thing, I think, and hopefully I'm excited to see what kind of develops for us with our little shrine there in the back. A couple of things then, finally, some more practical things. This might seem like a little bit more of like a class or something than anything else, but wanted to talk a little bit about some observations that I have as a pastor and as a priest on funerals. As we're in this month of November, it's interesting. The church actually, this is the book that we use that has all of our prayers and everything in it for funerals and other things involving those situations, prayers for the dead and so forth. And it's interesting that in the introduction to that, it asks that priests talk about this. It says regularly. And so wanted to do that a little bit here today because there are some questions that we received that I think it would be helpful for you all to know as well. The first observation that I wanted to help let everybody know about, I guess, would be the idea that one of the things that the church is probably most liberal on, and liberal not in the political sense, but in the sense of applying it to the most people is the Catholic funeral mass. And what I mean by that is, a lot of times people think that you have to be Catholic in order to have a Catholic funeral, and you do not. In fact, the church says if anybody ever passes who is not Catholic but would like to still be buried or receive the Catholic funeral rites and so forth, they are welcome to that. And a very personal story on that from my own life, when I was just in my first year of priesthood, my grandfather passed away. And he was a staunch Southern Baptist in Kentucky. And, he would always give us a hard time when we were going off to Holy Day Masses, or whatever. You crazy Catholics, and all this stuff. And but he had said at one point in his life that, he's like, basically something to the effect of, I kind of like the Catholic funerals that I've been to, and if you guys want to go ahead and bury me, I'll let you. And so anyway, as a new priest, I was able to have a funeral mass for my grandfather. Which was obviously very neat for me and very cool. But maybe there are some family or friends who are wondering if that would be an option for them. And I just wanted to let you know that that's a real important thing that we make available to anyone who would choose to have that service. A second thing about funerals that I think is really important that I've seen in my first few years as a priest, I want to really encourage you to plan your funeral now. And that sounds kind of morbid, but spiritually, it helps get us to think about the end, and the fact that this life is not the end of all things. St. Francis used to have a skull that he would sit on his desk, and it was about one of his only possessions. And he had that because it reminded him daily to think about the fact that he was going to die. And so there is that spiritual benefit to it. It gets us thinking about, as we can sometimes get so wrapped up in what goes on in our life each day. And so that's one advantage, but also another advantage to that. Sometimes I've run into situations where maybe this person who has passed was a faithful Catholic, daily Mass, even, and was here every Sunday and every holy day of obligation, but they didn't make their wishes known about the fact that they would like to have a Catholic funeral Mass. And what happens is sometimes if it's their children or their extended family who then is given care of that funeral planning process, they opt to and choose to not have a Catholic funeral Mass for their mother or their father or their spouse or whatever it might be. And I don't, as the priest, it would be wrong for me to go and kick the door down at the funeral home and bring the body here for a funeral mass. We don't get involved in that way, obviously, at that point. I don't go to the family and say, well, that she really would have wanted or he really would have wanted a Catholic funeral mass. We're there to care for the family in those moments. If you make those known, if you make those intentions known, you can actually turn them in, fill out the papers and turn them into a funeral home if you know, or you can drop them off with us here at the church. But that can be a really helpful thing for you and your family. It can sometimes save a lot of grief and anxiety. Sometimes half the family wants mom or dad to have a Catholic funeral mass, and the other half doesn't. And if mom or dad didn't make it known, sometimes there's even tension there. So just want to encourage you to think about that and maybe start planning that out for yourself. The fourth and final thing that I wanted to just offer a little bit of reflection on, and again, this is especially what the church in here asks priests to regularly communicate about, and that is the church's understanding of cremation. And oftentimes, cremation it was not allowed in the church for a long time, and it was given permission. We've been given permission to do that now. But there are some things that we need that the church asks us to reflect on about that before. It's not just kind of a blanket approval and an allowance for all forms of cremation. One of the things the church says in its allowance of cremation is that what is highly and much more preferable is the presence of the body at the funeral mass. That if cremation is desired, that cremation take place after the funeral mass has occurred. And the reason for that, and it's actually a very beautiful passage in here, it talks about, the church says that the body of a deceased Catholic is also the body that was once washed in baptism, anointed with the oil of salvation, and fed with the bread of life. Thus, the church's reverence for the sacredness of the human body grows out of a reverence and concern for the human person. So there's this sense in which the body itself, not just something that at death is discarded, and we honor that body because of the fact that it's received the sacraments, it is the vehicle in which we have come to know God, and so on and so forth. It says that cremation does not enjoy the same value as burial of the body. The church clearly prefers and urges that the body of the deceased be present for the funeral rites, since the presence of the human body better expresses the values which the church affirms in those funeral rites. And I think that that's just a very powerful statement. And I want to say here too, maybe you or your family have been a part of a mass or a funeral situation where there was cremation. That in no way are we talking badly about that or looking down on that. It's simply an opportunity to do what the church asks, which is kind of reflect on this moving forward. It also says, the church says that the cremated remains should be buried in a grave or entombed in a mausoleum. The practice of scattering cremated remains on the sea, from the air, or on the ground, or keeping cremated remains in the home of a relative or friend of the deceased are not the reverent disposition that the church requires. So if there is cremation, it should be taking place ideally after the funeral mass, and also should be then still leading to a burial of some kind. And so if there are other questions that you ever have on any of that, be happy to reflect with you or share any other things. But again, wanted to kind of follow the church's request here that we think about these things and speak about them. Hopefully that has provided some practical things for you as well, as we always continue to wrestle and struggle with the meaning of death, and also looking forward to the hope of the resurrection in heaven, as the Pharisees struggled to do in today's gospel, and as that mother in our first reading today was confronted with as well.